For years, I drove a 1999 Toyota Corolla, but in July 2023, I got rid of it. I live in a city with decent enough transit, and while our cycling infrastructure leaves a lot to be desired, I'm generally pretty healthy and comfortable riding my bike on the infrastructure that we do have. So I knew I could go car free, but why did I? Well, it could be that my car was costing me nearly $500 a month. I'm Alex, and this is a channel about living car-free in a North American city, and making it a little easier to do so, hopefully. So my car was costing me $500 a month. That's pretty high, right? Well, sadly, no. I was living cheap. While I was spending about $5,000 to $6,000 a year on transportation, according to StatsCan, the average Canadian household in 2021 was spending about $10,000 a year on transportation. And that's after a pandemic-era decrease of 20.7% from 2019. So yeah, the cash savings have been awesome. I've been able to save a lot more money and even justify a trip or two. But one of the biggest comments I've gotten on my car-free videos have warned me about how much it'll suck in winter. We've had a pretty warm and dry winter, so it wasn't all that bad. Until, of course, the spooky winter showed up. The other week, I had to wait for the bus in minus 35 degrees Celsius. And, of course, thanks to the weather, there were a ton of delays in the bus schedule. On one of these days of super cold weather, I wound up waiting in the bus shelter for nearly 30 minutes. The good news is I have some great winter gear, which I owned before going car free anyways. Dressed for the weather, I got a little bit chilly after the long wait, but honestly, it wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be. And if the delays and extra time taken to get around are the issue for you, then winter just isn't for you. Regardless of what mode you're using to get around, the winter weather is going to cause delays. When I had my car, I'd have to let it warm up, drive slower on the ice, and I'd get delayed because of collisions on my route. There's really no escaping it, sorry. Though I will say I have been converted to the bus. I love cycling, and I spent most of my first 3 months without a car getting around by bike or e-scooter, but you really can't beat the wind down of the bus. That said, I do like the wind down of the bike too, being able to stop and enjoy sunsets like this. So 6 months in, and being car free is kind of boring. It's just how I get around now. But something I've really noticed is the importance of location. I moved 2 months ago, and now I'm not sure which location I like better. So let's compare and contrast the getting around aspect of the old place versus the new place. We're going to talk about getting from home to 4 different places, and we'll discuss the different modes I can use to get to each of these places. We'll start with work, and then we'll move on to social life, so friends and community activities. Then, of course, Around the Bend will be included in this. It's my favorite restaurant, so it's probably the most important metric of how good of a place it is to live. And then we'll wrap it up talking about errands. Now, be forewarned, this is going to be a number-heavy episode, but I think it's got some interesting data, and it's going to be an interesting look into my own car-free experience, and maybe give you some perspective on your own. I don't know. So, how did I get to work from my old place? Because the weather was nicer and the days were longer, I'd usually scoot or bike. That typically took 45 minutes and was mostly on separated infrastructure. So honestly, it wasn't awful. Busing was about the same time at 50 minutes. It was a 2-seat ride primarily on the Max Yellow BRT, followed by a more local bus. This bus route was also quite consistent in its timing. If the buses lined up perfectly, it'd be a 30-minute trip, but I always had to wait a little bit, so it wound up being 50 minutes. As an interesting comparison, driving to work would have taken me 15 minutes, thanks to the proximity I had to a highway. Now let's compare this to my new place. Cycling is 10 minutes longer at 55 minutes, and it uses about the same quality of cycling infrastructure. Some of it's roads, some of it's multi-use pathways. The bus is where things get kind of weird. If I time the buses perfectly, it's a 3-seat, 40-minute ride. Usually on weekdays, I can manage a 3-seat, 50-minute ride. But on weekends, the Max Teal, my new BRT, calls it a night weirdly early. The commute can end up being an hour and a half just because of the different route I have to take because this one bus is taken off of service at 8 p.m. on a Saturday. Luckily, the driver of the local route knows I need to connect with the Max Teal, and she usually manages to get me there in time. Driving from my new place would take 20 minutes. And I'll admit I do miss that consistency where the bus seems completely random sometimes, especially if I don't quite make the connection, which is why I look forward to getting back to cycling. Another concern has been for my social life, which I can appreciate, especially if the way that you get to see your friends is by car. In my previous place, though, I lived in a basement suite with friends occupying the main floor. And in my new place, I've got a friend in the basement suite, and I'm also friends with my roommates who live on the main floor with me. Not to mention the wonders of modern technology connecting me with friends all over the world, or the connections I make with people at work. But let's talk about the other social and community activities I get up to. First is choir. From the old place, it'd take me 40 minutes on one bus to get to choir, which I'll note that half of that time was spent walking. Cycling, it took 25 minutes, mostly on paths, and driving would be 15 minutes. Driving from the new place is the same 15 minutes, cycling would be 30 minutes, not much of a change, and the bus would take 2 seats and an hour to get there. Other than choir, I also play soccer every week, and honestly, this one's kind of a doozy. The car parking there isn't great, but it does exist and there is enough. There is no bike parking, and once you get off the bus a few blocks away, you don't have any pedestrian infrastructure. None. Zero. It sucks. But here are the numbers. From the old place, we had a minimum of an 80-minute 3-seat ride. And on the top end, it was a 4-seat and 2-hour ride. Or 55 minutes by bike. Which is so much better. Driving would be 20 minutes, which is also so much better. From the new place, however, it's 15 minutes by car, 40 minutes by bike, which actually surprised me. It's really not that bad at all. Or it's 1 hour by bus, pretty consistently, which is much better. Now, let's talk about Around the Bend, my favorite restaurant. Fresh pretzel sandwiches, fresh sauces, all made in-house. We're not sponsored, but I just think everybody should know about it. For my old place, it was 1 hour by bus, 25 minutes by bike, and 15 minutes by car. And now it's 30 minutes by bus, 10 minutes by bike, and 5 minutes by car. And I should note, it's only a 30-minute walk, so you can see why I moved to my new place. Let me know down in the comments how close you are to Around the Bend. Now, let's talk about groceries. This is a pretty important one because you gotta eat. I basically just eat beans and rice though, so my shopping trips aren't crazy, and the weight of my shopping trips isn't an issue at all. At my old place, the grocery store was a 10-minute walk. I don't have any data on the bus because it was basically at my bus stop, just across a road and a parking lot. By bike, it was 3 minutes, which kind of feels a little bit pointless, and it was 5 minutes by car. That's thanks to modal filters. Prioritizing pedestrians. This is one area where I really actually miss my old place. Now, in the place where I'm at, I'm in the middle of several larger stores like Superstore, Costco, and Walmart, which are great for having tons and tons of stock, but the problem when you have larger stores, you also get larger parking lots and are serving a larger population, which means you're further from more people or less walkable for more people. So they're all a little too far for convenient walking. The closest is a 20-minute walk away, which is fine, I guess, but it's not that sweet 10-minute walk I used to have. The bus routes are also awful. The best option Google Maps gives me is 20 minutes, 17 minutes of which is just walking, so I may as well just walk. The closest by bike is 5 minutes. Interestingly, it's also 5 minutes by car. So I do miss my 10-minute walk to co-op, but I guess I'm not in an awful situation. It's definitely doable. My retail job is pretty close to a grocery store too, so I'll usually just pick up a can of beans while I'm there. And that's been working all right for me. I've drawn a few conclusions looking at all of this data. Number one is your ability to go car-free will largely depend on where you live, even within the same city. And I'm still making it work pretty comfortably, but there are a few extra nuisances at my new place. My second conclusion from this whole experience is moving without a car isn't as complicated or as difficult as you might think. Whether or not I had a car, I would have had to ask for help or rent a larger vehicle. My car wouldn't have been able to carry my desk, no matter how many trips I made. The only time I've ever moved without help was returning to Canada from the US in 2021, and that wasn't without complications because I had to do a lot of downsizing. And apparently, you can't bring mattresses across the border into Canada. So my mattress lives in Sweetgrass, Montana now. It was a great mattress too, so I'm hoping whoever has it is enjoying it. And finally, a major concern in going car free isn't so much that the bus takes too long, because if the buses had increased frequency and hours of operation, the trips wouldn't be so bad. And it's not that cycling takes too long, because honestly, it doesn't. We just don't have decent enough infrastructure to make it a viable option. Instead, I'd say a major concern about going car free is that we haven't put in the effort to making these modes a real option. We haven't put effort into transportation freedom and building a city with options. We haven't built a humane city. At least not yet.